Hi, my name is Erin Wallace. I'm a middle school art teacher, and I am going to share with you guys my formative learning cycle that I prepared. The project that I'm going to share with you is a watercolor wheel project that I taught for a color unit. The standard that I focused on was under the domain Create, Present, and Perform, which is kind of a general heading that kind of scoops up all sorts of different elements of art education, which is kind of nice because you can kind of squeeze anything into that heading. I try to focus on each of the different 7 elements in the art education. This is one focusing on color. The learning targets that I wanted students to focus on during this lesson were as follows. Number 1, students should, at the end of the lesson, be able to mix secondary and intermediate colors using only the primary colors, which are red, yellow, and blue. Because it's a watercolor lesson, I also wanted students at the end of the project to gain experience using watercolor materials to control their paint and achieve desired results. What does that mean? It means that kids can mix the color that they're wanting and adjust it to fine-tune it if they need to, and they also need to be able to apply their paint to the paper with control. So those are all specified as learning targets for this entire project. How do I share my learning targets with my class? I do many different ways of sharing learning targets, and it really depends on the project, what works best. But in general, I always start with item 1, which is to just get my class settled, and I think all teachers probably do this. But when my kids enter the room, we look at the objective, I show them the agenda, what are we doing today, and then recently with the beginning of this course, I added to this my learning target, which I have been listing on the board. I also have started, if you notice the asterisk there, I've started to kind of check in with my class. Hey, if you guys are on task, you should be doing this right now. Or there's 5 minutes left, check in, you should have made it this far. So I'm giving my kids prompts throughout the day that kind of make them revisit, where are we, what's the goal, how close are you to being finished, and we're going to clean up pretty soon. So I kind of do those get settled things throughout the day, monitoring my kids' focus and whatnot. The second thing I do to share the learning target, and this one is specific for this project, is I like to show my students an example of the product. So I always let my kids see where we're going before we start so they have a real clear idea of what the assignment is, what a quality criteria example should look like when they're finished, and this helps kids just kind of settle in and kind of know where they're going before they get started, which I think is really helpful. The next thing I do with my projects, and this is more for my my learners who like to see things kind of broken down more in a structured format, I provide clear expectations through project instructions and requirement sheets. So if kids are not really good auditory learners or not super good visual learners, they'll always have this instruction sheet that they can refer back to. With these instruction sheets, I take each project and I break it down into small steps. So it's part 1, do this, then do that. Part 2, do this, and then that. Part 3. So kids can really break projects down into small parts, and that helps me pace my class as well. At the bottom of my project sheet, I'll always alert kids from day 1 what the grading criteria is. What do they need to do on their project to meet the requirements? What is expected of them? So they're really clear from the beginning what the expectations are. So I think that's really important when sharing the learning targets with students. Once I've shared my learning targets, we get into the performance of understanding. With this project, we step by step set up our color wheel. We started with the primary colors, and then I taught them how to mix the primaries together to make the secondaries, and then I taught them how to mix them in unequal amounts to make the intermediate colors. And then this was a time that once I went through each kind of instruction, students were able to then work on their assignments independently during independent work time. This was a perfect time for me to, while the students were working, is when I would start to circulate throughout the classroom and offer comments. So these are all examples of my students' work, so I think they did a really good job. Anyway, so while they're working, I like to come through the room and offer feedback. This is my favorite kind of feedback to give because it's immediate. It directly affects what they're working on while they're working on it, and they can immediately apply it to their work to improve their work. So these are direct comments that I gave kids specifically on this project, so you can kind of get an idea of the comments that I give my kids. Like, I try to keep it real student friendly, like, oops, looks like that color got away from you, what does that mean? I always ask them questions. I try to have them answer, oh, maybe I added too much water. Yeah, let's blot it and let it dry. I'll show you how to paint over it. So I'm always trying to have them answer the question, and then I help them figure out how to continue. So if you want to kind of read through those, you can, or pause it for a minute and look through my comments. This feedback is really useful in my style of teaching. I really love this, and I really feel like my students get a lot out of it. Because it's a multiple day project, I do like to use a quick quiz as a quick formative assessment, sort of for myself and for my students as well. Just checking in, are they getting what I'm asking them? So bringing it back to the learning targets. Are students understanding how to mix colors, which was that first learning target? Can they name the colors? Do they understand how to mix a variety of colors? Can they name the colors? So this again is just a quick formative check-in during the project that I can get some information from my group to see how they're doing. And then at the end of the project, I'll give them a more formal scoring rubric. Actually, on this project, I didn't give it to them. I had students turn the project in, and I scored it with the scoring rubric. It's based on the 4-point grading scale. Each target is reflecting the learning target that was mentioned in the beginning of the presentation. I think this rubric works really well. It keeps things very fair, very organized. Students can come back and see, oh yeah, I got this, and I agree with that. So it keeps things really organized for both for myself and for my students. Some things that I'd want to change though after using this rubric, this is something I've tried with another rubric since I started this course, is I think I'm out of order here, but if you jump down to number 3, I've added an additional column or area to the right where once I have scored the rubric, I'll leave a comment, maybe a suggestion, or you did this really good, but try this. So just adding a little bit more reflection for the student. Something else that I'd maybe like to try is, going back up to number 1 there, is to let my students see the rubric at the beginning of the assignment to know the grading criteria. This might be a little redundant if they're already getting the grading criteria on their assignment sheet, but for some students that might make them feel like they have a little more control over their work. Also, number 2, I think this would be a really good opportunity to let my students self-assess using this rubric. Instead of me going over it, maybe letting my students go through the rubric, which I like to do occasionally, I just didn't happen to do it on this one, and have them score themselves and then give them an area at the bottom to provide comments, or maybe they need to answer some prompts that I've asked them to reflect on about their work, what they did well, what they'd like to improve, so on and so forth. But overall, I felt this was a really strong formative learning cycle. I think my kids did really well. I feel I learned a lot from the process, and it's definitely something I will do again in the future. I hope you liked my presentation, and I hope that you are all enjoying this formative learning cycle as much as I am. Thank you.